Think Honduras is just about bananas, coffee, and crime rates? Wait until you find out this country literally invented the term banana republic, but then kicked out American companies and took back control. You won't believe how a nation smaller than Pennsylvania has 3 completely different ethnic groups that most people have never heard of, or how importing cars older than 10 years can land you massive fines. Number 15. Honduras is the birthplace of the term banana republic, but ironically fought back and nationalized all American banana operations in 1975. Honduras was the first nation to be branded a banana republic in 1904, and by 1929 Honduras was the main exporter of bananas in the world, with 2 massive U.S. corporations controlling virtually everything from railroads to ports to entire regions of the country. Here's what most people don't realize. While the world uses banana republic as an insult for politically unstable countries, Honduras actually became the poster child for this phenomenon because American fruit companies literally controlled their government, currency, and infrastructure for over 70 years. Wait until you find out how they turned the tables. Starting in 1975, the Honduran government canceled all concessions and contracts with American banana companies and nationalized some of the lands the United States controlled. You heard right. The original Banana Republic eventually said enough and kicked out the foreign corporations that gave it that name. Sounds unbelievable, but Honduras went from being the textbook example of foreign corporate control to taking back ownership of their docks, railways, and banana production entirely. This created one of the most dramatic economic reversals in Latin American history, where a country synonymous with exploitation managed to reclaim control of the very industry that defined its international reputation. Number 14. Importing any car over 10 years old into Honduras is completely illegal and can result in vehicle confiscation plus massive fines. Imports of motor vehicles over 10 years old, except classic collectible cars, and passenger buses over 13 years old are prohibited. Here's the shocking reality. While Americans regularly drive 15 to 20-year-old vehicles without thinking twice, Honduras treats decade-old cars like contraband. Wait until you find out the reasoning. This law exists partly to reduce emissions and partly to protect the local used car market, but it creates absurd situations where a perfectly functional 2013 Honda Civic is considered too dangerous for Honduran roads. You heard right. Cars that would be considered reliable daily drivers in the US become illegal imports simply because of their age. The enforcement is serious too. Customs officials will confiscate vehicles and impose fines that often exceed the car's original value. Think about trying to help family members by shipping them a dependable used car, only to discover you've accidentally committed a customs violation that could cost thousands in penalties. This law has created a bizarre automotive economy where newer cars are artificially expensive due to import restrictions, while perfectly good older vehicles sit unused in other countries because they can't legally cross Honduran borders. The Garifuna people of Honduras speak a language that combines African, Arawak, and Carib elements, making them one of the most linguistically unique communities in the Americas. Garifuna are the 3rd largest minority or indigenous community in Honduras, numbering 43,111 people. They are the descendants of African Carib populations from the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, who were exiled to the Honduran coast in the 18th century. Here's what makes their story absolutely fascinating. The ancestors of the Garifunas were brought from West and Central Africa to the Caribbean as captives, but their history as slaves was never officially documented. It is believed that they were survivors of shipwrecks or escaped captivity, and they found refuge among the Carib people of St. Vincent. You won't believe how this cultural fusion created something entirely unique. The Garifuna language contains words from at least 4 different continents, and their cultural practices blend African drumming traditions with indigenous Caribbean agricultural techniques and European colonial influences. Drumming, dancing, and storytelling are central to Garifuna identity, with punta and paranda as iconic forms of expression performed during community celebrations and festivals. Sounds unbelievable, but the Garifuna culture represents one of the most successful examples of cultural synthesis in world history, where forced displacement and cultural mixing created something entirely new rather than destroying the original traditions. This community maintains distinct languages, foods, music, and customs that exist nowhere else on Earth. Honduras has more indigenous languages still spoken today than most European countries, yet over half the population lives in extreme poverty. The Lenca people, who are the largest indigenous group, have maintained their cultural identity despite centuries of colonization and modern economic pressures. The Lenca people are the largest indigenous ethnic group who are primarily from Honduras. The Lenca culture is deeply rooted in the land where they live and is tied to many of their traditions. For instance, the Gualcarque River in Honduras is a sacred space for them. Here's the heartbreaking paradox. While Honduras preserves incredible cultural diversity with groups like the Lenca, Miskito, Tolupan, and Garifuna maintaining distinct languages and traditions, opportunity is scarce for jobs and education, which make life improvement challenging. Wait until you find out the stunning contrast. Honduras has communities that have successfully preserved pre-Columbian languages, agricultural techniques, and spiritual practices for over 500 years, yet many of these same communities lack access to basic healthcare, electricity, or clean water. You heard right. You can find indigenous communities speaking languages that predate European contact while living in conditions that most of the developed world would consider unacceptable. This creates a surreal situation where cultural preservation exists alongside extreme economic marginalization, making Honduras simultaneously one of the most culturally rich and economically challenged countries in Central America. Abortion is completely illegal in Honduras under all circumstances, with prison sentences of up to 6 years for anyone involved in the procedure. Abortion is illegal in Honduras under all circumstances, with prison sentences of up to 6 years for people who have or perform abortions. Here's the shocking extent of this law. Honduras maintains one of the world's most restrictive abortion policies, with 0 exceptions for rape, incest, fetal abnormalities, or even life-threatening medical conditions. You won't believe how strictly this is enforced. Women seeking abortions, doctors who perform them, and even people who help facilitate the procedures all face serious criminal charges. This creates devastating situations where Honduran women with life-threatening pregnancies must either risk death or travel to other countries for medical care their own healthcare system cannot legally provide. Think about the medical nightmare this creates. Doctors must watch patients die from preventable complications because providing life-saving treatment could result in prison sentences longer than those given for many violent crimes. The law is so absolute that even emergency contraception and some forms of birth control exist in legal gray areas, making family planning complicated and potentially criminalized. Here's the scary part. In March, the newly appointed Supreme Court justices confirmed a previous ruling rejecting the argument that the ban is unconstitutional, meaning this extreme restriction has been legally reinforced rather than challenged. Honduras declared a national health emergency in 2024 due to dengue fever, yet the country lacks basic mosquito control infrastructure in most regions. The Honduran Ministry of Health declared a national emergency in June 2024 due to an increase in dengue cases. Here's the frustrating reality that highlights broader infrastructure problems. Honduras faces recurring health crises from preventable mosquito-borne diseases because basic public health infrastructure remains inadequate despite decades of international aid. Wait until you find out the scope of this problem. Dengue fever, Zika virus, and chikungunya regularly sweep through Honduran communities, causing thousands of hospitalizations and deaths that could be prevented with proper water management, waste collection, and mosquito control programs that most developed countries take for granted. You heard right. A country with some of the world's most advanced tropical disease research facilities simultaneously struggles with disease outbreaks that proper sanitation could eliminate. The dengue emergency exemplifies how Honduras faces 21st century health challenges with 19th century infrastructure, where standing water from poor drainage systems creates breeding grounds for disease vectors in urban areas. The Ministry of Health has carried out dengue prevention, control, and surveillance activities, along with the promotion of preventive measures through the media and educational campaigns. But public health campaigns cannot substitute for the basic infrastructure improvements that would address the root causes. This creates a cycle where Honduras repeatedly responds to preventable health emergencies rather than investing in the foundational infrastructure that would prevent them from occurring in the first place. Number 9. The Copan Maya ruins in Honduras contain some of the most sophisticated astronomical calculations in the ancient world, yet most Hondurans cannot afford to visit their own UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here's the mind-blowing contradiction. Honduras is home to Copan, which archaeologists consider one of the most scientifically advanced cities in pre-Columbian America, featuring hieroglyphic staircases, astronomical observatories, and mathematical calculations that rival modern precision. The ancient Maya at Copan developed calendar systems more accurate than those used in medieval Europe, and created architectural marvels that demonstrate understanding of advanced engineering principles. Wait until you find out the heartbreaking irony: entrance fees to Copan cost approximately $15 per person, which represents nearly half a day's wages for the average Honduran worker earning around $2 per day. You won't believe the economic segregation this creates. Foreign tourists easily pay to explore Honduras's greatest cultural treasure, while local families cannot afford to see the archaeological wonders built by their own ancestors. Sounds unbelievable, but this pricing system means that Honduran schoolchildren learn about their Maya heritage from textbooks, rather than experiencing these incredible historical sites firsthand. The site generates significant revenue from international tourism, yet the economic benefits rarely reach the rural communities surrounding Copan, creating a system where cultural patrimony becomes a luxury commodity rather than accessible heritage. Think about the cultural alienation this creates. Hondurans become strangers to their own history, while foreign visitors gain intimate knowledge of Maya achievements that local communities helped preserve for centuries. Number 8. Honduras operates one of the world's most complex currency systems where US dollars, Honduran lempiras, and bartering all function simultaneously in different parts of the economy. Here's the confusing reality that even locals struggle to navigate. Urban areas primarily use lempiras for daily transactions, tourist zones operate almost exclusively in US dollars, and rural communities often rely on barter systems or informal currency exchanges that bypass official banking entirely. Wait until you find out how chaotic this becomes. A single shopping trip in Honduras might require 3 different payment methods depending on which stores you visit, what you're buying, and who you're buying from. The exchange rate between lempiras and dollars fluctuates constantly, but many businesses set their own conversion rates that can vary significantly from official bank rates, creating opportunities for confusion and exploitation. You heard right. Paying for lunch might require calculating currency conversions that change by the hour, while purchasing gasoline might demand exact change in specific denominations that aren't always available. This multi-currency reality creates bizarre economic distortions where identical products cost dramatically different amounts, depending on which currency you use and where you shop. Here's the scary part. Rural Hondurans often cannot access formal banking services, forcing them to rely on informal money changers who charge substantial fees for basic financial transactions. Think about trying to budget when your money's value changes depending on which neighborhood you're in. That's daily life for millions of Hondurans navigating an economy where currency itself becomes a barrier to commerce. Number 7. Honduras has higher biodiversity per square kilometer than most countries twice its size, yet environmental destruction occurs faster than scientists can catalog new species. Here's the stunning natural reality. Honduras contains cloud forests, Caribbean beaches, Pacific coasts, pine forests, and tropical rainforests, all within a country smaller than Pennsylvania, creating ecological diversity that rivals much larger nations. The country hosts over 8,000 plant species, 700 bird species, and countless insects and mammals that exist nowhere else on Earth, making it one of the world's biological hotspots. Wait until you find out the tragic irony. Biologists estimate they're discovering new species in Honduras faster than they can formally document them, yet habitat destruction occurs at such rapid rates that species likely go extinct before scientists even know they existed. You won't believe the pace of this ecological loss. Deforestation for cattle ranching, agriculture, and urban development eliminates thousands of acres of unique habitat annually, while climate change alters mountain ecosystems faster than plant and animal communities can adapt. Sounds unbelievable, but Honduras simultaneously contains some of Central America's most pristine wilderness areas and experiences some of the region's highest rates of environmental degradation. Here's the heartbreaking part. Indigenous communities that have sustainably managed these ecosystems for centuries often lack legal title to their traditional lands, making them powerless to prevent destruction by outside interests. The result is that Honduras loses irreplaceable biological heritage while struggling to balance conservation with economic development, creating environmental tragedy on a scale that most people cannot comprehend. Number 6. Honduran law requires married women to obtain their husband's written permission for certain legal and financial transactions. Yet the country simultaneously elected its first female president in recent years. Here's the contradictory legal reality that reflects deeper cultural tensions. Honduras maintains legal codes that treat married women as dependents, requiring spousal consent for major decisions, while simultaneously making progress toward gender equality and political representation and professional opportunities. Wait until you find out the specific restrictions. Married women may need husbands' signatures to apply for passports, start businesses, or make certain property transactions, creating legal infantilization that contrasts sharply with women's actual roles in Honduran society. You heard right. A country where women serve as doctors, lawyers, business owners, and political leaders maintains legal frameworks that assume wives cannot make independent decisions about their own lives. This creates absurd situations where highly educated professional women must obtain permission slips from their husbands for legal procedures that single women can complete independently. Here's the bizarre part. These laws reflect colonial-era legal traditions that many countries have reformed, yet they persist in Honduras despite contradicting the reality of modern gender roles and family dynamics. The enforcement varies widely, with urban areas generally ignoring these requirements, while rural regions may strictly apply them, creating legal uncertainty that depends more on geography and local customs than actual written law. Think about the psychological impact of laws that officially declare adult women incompetent to make their own decisions. This legal framework undermines female autonomy even when it's not actively enforced. Number 5. Honduras has one of the world's highest murder rates, yet certain regions are so safe that locals never lock their doors or worry about petty crime. Here's the shocking geographic reality that international media rarely explains. Honduras's violence statistics are heavily concentrated in specific urban areas, particularly around Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, while vast rural regions and smaller towns maintain extremely low crime rates where traditional community safety networks still function effectively. Wait until you find out the dramatic contrasts within the same country neighborhoods in major cities where armed security guards protect every business exist just hours away from rural communities where children walk alone to school and families leave their homes unlocked during multi-day trips to market towns. You won't believe how localized this violence actually is. Honduras's national murder rate includes drug trafficking violence, gang conflicts, and organized crime that primarily affects specific demographics and geographic areas, while millions of Hondurans live in communities where violent crime is virtually non-existent. This creates a surreal situation where international travel advisories warn against visiting Honduras entirely, yet many regions are statistically safer than major American cities. Here's the media distortion that creates global misperceptions. News coverage focuses on the most dangerous areas while ignoring the majority of Honduran territory, where traditional social structures maintain community safety through informal networks of mutual support and collective responsibility. The result is that Honduras becomes synonymous with violence in international consciousness, while large portions of the country maintain social cohesion and safety levels that many developed nations would envy. Think about how this affects tourism and international perception. Potential visitors avoid an entire country because of localized problems that don't represent the majority of Honduran communities or experiences. Honduras produces some of the world's finest coffee, yet most Hondurans cannot afford to drink the coffee grown in their own mountains and instead consume instant coffee imported from other countries. Here's the economic absurdity that perfectly illustrates global trade inequalities. Honduran coffee farmers grow premium Arabica beans that sell for $20 to $30 per pound in specialty coffee shops worldwide, yet local workers earn wages so low that purchasing their own coffee becomes a luxury expense they just can't justify. Wait until you find out the shocking economics. Coffee pickers, who hand-select the beans that become expensive single-origin exports, earn approximately $5 to $8 per day, making a pound of the coffee they harvested cost more than a full day's wages. You heard right. The people who grow coffee that American hipsters consider artisanal treasure cannot afford to drink it themselves because international markets price them out of consuming their own labor. This creates the ultimate coffee paradox. Honduras ranks among the world's top coffee exporters, yet Honduran supermarkets are filled with cheap instant coffee brands from Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico because local premium coffee gets immediately shipped overseas for higher profits. Here's the cultural tragedy. Traditional coffee-growing communities that have perfected cultivation techniques over generations gradually lose their own coffee-drinking customs because economic necessity forces them to sell their entire harvest rather than keeping any for local consumption. The result is that coffee culture in Honduras increasingly revolves around imported instant products, while the country's authentic, locally grown coffee becomes a luxury commodity available primarily to foreign consumers who can afford premium prices. Think about the irony. Visitors to Honduras often cannot find authentic local coffee in restaurants and hotels because it's too expensive compared to imported substitutes, making tourists drink Brazilian coffee while surrounded by Honduran coffee plantations. The Bay Islands of Honduras are closer to the United States than to the Honduran capital, creating a cultural and economic divide where islanders often feel more connected to Florida than to their own mainland. Here's the geographical reality that creates national identity complications. Roatan and other Bay Islands lie approximately 40 miles off the Honduran coast, but are actually closer to Key West, Florida, than to Tegucigalpa, with direct flights to Miami being more frequent and affordable than transportation to mainland Honduras. Wait until you find out the cultural implications. Bay Islanders primarily speak English, use US dollars for most transactions, follow American sports teams, and maintain family connections across the Caribbean that often supersede their relationships with mainland Honduran culture. You won't believe how disconnected these regions are. Traveling from the Bay Islands to Tegucigalpa requires expensive flights or complicated boat and bus combinations that can take over 12 hours, while reaching Miami takes just 2.5 hours with multiple daily flight options. This geographical isolation creates economic dependencies where Bay Islanders rely heavily on American tourism, imported American goods, and US-based employment opportunities, making them economically integrated with North America rather than Central America. Here's the identity crisis this creates. Bay Island residents hold Honduran passports and citizenship, yet live in communities that culturally, economically, and linguistically resemble Caribbean islands, with historical British colonial influence rather than Spanish-speaking mainland Honduras. The result is a situation where parts of Honduras function as de facto American economic territories, while maintaining nominal political integration with a country they rarely interact with directly. Think about the complexity for national governance. Managing citizens who are geographically, culturally, and economically oriented toward a foreign country creates challenges for taxation, law enforcement, and political representation that most nations never face. Honduras operates under a legal system where customary indigenous law runs parallel to national law, creating situations where the same action can be legal under one system and criminal under another. Here's the fascinating legal complexity that most people never realize exists. Indigenous communities throughout Honduras maintain traditional justice systems that handle disputes, property rights, family law, and even criminal matters according to customs that predate European colonization by centuries, yet these decisions must somehow coexist with modern Honduran civil and criminal law. Wait until you find out how this plays out in practice. Land disputes might be resolved through traditional councils using customary law that recognizes oral agreements and collective ownership, while simultaneously being subject to national property laws that require written documentation and individual titles. You won't believe the jurisdictional complications this creates. A conflict between community members might be resolved through traditional mediation that both parties accept as final and binding, yet the same dispute could theoretically be reopened in national courts using completely different legal standards and procedures. This dual legal system creates fascinating situations where indigenous communities operate sophisticated justice mechanisms that emphasize restoration and community harmony rather than punishment, yet participants in these traditional processes remain subject to national laws that might impose different penalties for the same behaviors. Here's the cultural richness this preserves. Traditional legal systems in Honduras maintain concepts of collective responsibility, environmental stewardship, and conflict resolution that offer alternatives to Western legal frameworks, providing models for community-based justice that many modern societies are trying to rediscover. The result is that Honduras inadvertently operates one of the world's most complex legal systems, where multiple forms of law and justice coexist in ways that require constant negotiation between different worldviews and different concepts of how society should function. Number 1. Honduras is simultaneously one of the world's most dangerous countries according to statistics, and one of the most hospitable according to visitors, creating a paradox where international fear prevents people from experiencing one of Central America's most welcoming cultures. Here's the ultimate Honduran contradiction that, well, encapsulates everything complex about this nation. While global media focuses on violent statistics that make Honduras appear uninhabitable, millions of travelers, aid workers, researchers, and business visitors consistently report encounters with extraordinary generosity, warmth, and hospitality that rival any destination in the world. Wait until you find out the profound disconnect between international perceptions and actual visitor experiences. Tourists who overcome their fears to visit Honduras frequently describe it as their most positive travel experience, praising the genuine friendliness of local people, the stunning natural beauty, and the authentic cultural interactions that are increasingly rare in more touristy destinations. You won't believe how this reputation paradox affects every aspect of Honduran life. While international businesses avoid investment due to security concerns, the same country produces world-class coffee, maintains incredible biodiversity, preserves multiple indigenous cultures, and demonstrates remarkable resilience in communities that have maintained strong social bonds despite economic and political challenges. This creates a tragic situation where Honduras's greatest asset, its people and culture, remains hidden from the world because fear-based media coverage prevents most international visitors from discovering the reality behind the statistics. Here's the human cost of this misrepresentation. Talented Hondurans emigrate partly because their country's reputation makes international opportunities difficult to access, while the communities they leave behind continue demonstrating the very qualities of solidarity and mutual support that could attract positive international attention if the world knew about them. The result is that Honduras becomes trapped in a cycle where negative publicity becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, preventing the kind of cultural exchange, tourism revenue, and international partnership that could help address the underlying problems that create the negative statistics in the first place, while the actual Honduras, a country of incredible cultural richness, environmental beauty, and human warmth, remains largely unknown to the wider world. So we've just discovered Honduras's most mind-bending contradictions. From banana republic reversals to dual legal systems to coffee farmers who can't afford their own beans. Which paradox shocked you the most? Have you ever experienced the gap between a country's reputation and reality? Subscribe for more eye-opening facts about nations that will completely flip your worldview.